4-0 Illini, 3-0 Penn State, plus whiteout energy.
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Illini. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Simple reminder, you can find us on your favorite audio platform and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, and of course, it's time for that official Illinois and Penn State preview. Earlier this week, I did a long-form recording with Zach Sako, the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. What I'm going to do is go ahead and play that for you. You get to learn a little bit about where Penn State's coming from. I kind of talked to him a little bit about Illinois, and we'll see if your opinion has changed one way or the other. I think it's going to be super informative. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your predictions on the game. And later today, I'll drop my official prediction for the Penn State game in an episode. You're going to get 2 episodes. And later today, you're going to get my official predictions for the Penn State game on Saturday. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
Long time no chat. It's another Locked On crossover between Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Illini. I'm Zach Sako of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Sunny Verma of Locked On Illini, and it's a top 20 matchup in prime time between Penn State and Illinois, and we're going to talk about all of it on today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. That's all it takes, $5, and you'll get $200. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we want to know your predictions, your thoughts about this game down in the comment section. Please leave a like, but more importantly, let us know your thoughts down in the comment section. Sonny, I'll start off with this, and I encourage you to, throw things back at me too. Challenge my takes on this Penn State team. But when I look at Illinois coming into this game, undefeated, 2 top 25 wins, Sonny, I look at them and I don't know how legitimate they are. I think Nebraska should have won that game. They had many opportunities to do it. They had many opportunities to win by double digits. At the end of the day, a win is a win. But I feel like Nebraska has lucked into not only 1, but 2 quality wins because Kansas shouldn't have been in the top 25. But what's your take on it?
I'm going to simply friendly disagree. That Nebraska game could have gone both ways. I can argue the same thing. At the end of the second quarter, Luke Altmaier had a face mask called hold against him. We were driving. At that point, it would have been first down. And Brett Bielema, in typical Brett Bielema style, what he tries to do is always try to get a score at the end of the second half and then receive the ball in the third quarter and try to double dip and score twice. And if that face mask were to have been called, we could have potentially scored there. That was it ended up being a 14-point turnaround because Nebraska ended up scoring once they got the ball back. So the Nebraska game's interesting in the sense where hindsight is one thing, right? Like the way you worded that made it sound like Nebraska was the 10-point underdog there. Nebraska was 9.5-point favorites. It was Illinois going into a tough environment on a Friday night in a sold-out Lincoln Memorial Stadium, and with 90% of the college football world watching that game. And it was Illinois that performed for 60 minutes, who played, I think it was 2 very good teams. I think they're both 2 top 25, maybe top 20-ish type of teams. But, for me, I would argue Illinois is a lot more battle-tested than what Penn State is coming in.
Fair.
Penn State had that week 1 victory against West Virginia, which, was a very nice victory. But Kent State might be the worst team in D1 at this point. So, whether they're top 25 ranked victories in your eyes or not between Kansas and Nebraska, I think at least Illinois knows what it's going to be like to be punched in the face during the season. And they won't exactly be shocked when it comes to Saturday. Whereas Penn State, it might be like their first real challenge this year.
I think West Virginia is at least the closest there, and West Virginia did in fact beat Kansas. Kansas also lost to UNLV. They're just not a top 25 team in my mind. And I think of if Dylan Raiola hits that wide open touchdown in the end zone on that third down play, or the kicker of Nebraska makes a what should be a chip shot 39-yard field goal at home, I just don't know that we're talking about the same instance. And I don't know that Illinois is in the top 25 if those chain of events actually happen here. But I'm glad that you said that Penn State's not battle tested, because we don't know how good West Virginia is at this point in time. Blew a 10-point lead to rival Pitt. They had to come from behind against that same Kansas team that I'm highly critical of. And Penn State, we now know just how valuable Andy Kotelnicki is as an offensive coordinator, as a play caller, because it is night and day compared to what Kansas did, because Kansas returned the core of its offense, and it looks like a shell of itself. Sunny, I also want to talk about how, yes, Illinois won that Kansas game. It was close, but Kansas's strength is always going to be its offense. It's always going to put up points. What do you make of the fact that Illinois caused 4 turnovers in that game against a quality Kansas offense, quality enough anyway, but they only scored 23 points? Kansas's defense is bad, and 23 points off of 4 turnovers in that game?
Yeah, I mean, they struggled in the second and third quarters. Absolutely. They've struggled offensively almost the first 3 games this year. Now, granted, we still scored 45 in the opener, and the third game we scored 30 points. But as I talked to you about this a little bit last week, a lot of folks wondered if the offense kind of looked a little neutered, and they really weren't playing the plays that we expected them to run this year. And then you saw the Nebraska game happen. And if you watch that Nebraska team against everyone else, the previous 3 games, that Illinois looked like they must have fired their offensive coordinator after that third game and hired someone new, because it looked like a brand new team. And I'm starting to wonder if, because of those first 3 teams, as you mentioned, not exactly known as defensive powerhouses, that they kind of bottled a couple of the more sneaky plays. Barry Lenny Jr., our offensive coordinator, had the game of his life against Nebraska with the schemes. Like, he took on, arguably the best defensive coordinator in the country in Tony White, and he put on a master class against him. So, granted, yes, the first 3 games were a little rough offensively, even though we did score 45, 23, and 30 points. It's the defense that's been the story for Illinois, though. 2 years ago, defense was the story. We were arguably the best defense in the country. This year, it's kind of a similar story. Our secondary, which I came into this season thinking was a huge question mark, has been one of the best in the conference. The defensive line may not have the ceiling that other top defensive lines do in the Big Ten, certainly not the ceiling that yours does, but they've been overcoached. And they're performing, basically containing Jalen Daniels that second game. They didn't let Jalen Daniels run the quarterback position the way he did last year. They basically forced him to throw the ball. And now I almost wonder if Illinois basically gave the game plan on how to play Kansas moving forward. Because, again, as you mentioned, they lost the following week to UNLV as well. So for me, this team kind of reminds me, and I'm speaking of Illinois, of the team of 2 years ago that started off the season 7-1. Maybe not quite at that level, just because of the playmakers that they had in the secondary, between Devin Weatherspoon, Quan Martin, and Sidney Brown. Those guys were seniors and juniors, whereas this team is a little bit younger, but the belief is there. The coaching staff has coached these guys up. I watched the game in a watch party with a couple of Nebraska folks on Friday night, and they couldn't believe just how close our defensive backs would continue to stick to their wide receivers. And so, this is going to be an interesting matchup for, Drew Aller too. Drew Aller is a guy who I'm higher on than most people.
Good.
Makes mistakes, but he has
What mistakes? What mistakes does he make?
No, I'm saying he doesn't make mistakes.
Oh, he doesn't? Okay. I misheard you there.
Yeah. He does not really. He's not a quarterback that forces things or makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. West Virginia, may be a better team than Kansas. I'll grant you that, but I think this is going to be the first real tough Big Ten defense that Drew Aller is going to be playing this year. And so for me, that's going to be what I'm going to be paying close attention to, because I know he doesn't try to force things, but our defensive backs, Xavier Scott, Miles Scott, they're very opportunistic. They're very ball hawkish. And you saw it in that Nebraska game. Torrey Cox Jr. goes up with, I believe it was Isaiah Nair in the touchdown. And half the crowd thought that Nebraska came down with the touchdown, but it turns out that Torrey Cox had ripped the ball away and it was an interception. We're going to be trying to do that every single time. You're going to challenge every single pass. And that's what I'm going to be really looking forward to seeing on Saturday.
We have some other major storylines to get to. The biggest difference from last year's version of this game to this year is that coordinator that was at Kansas and put up 30-plus points against a relatively similar Illinois defense. We're going to talk about that, plus the whiteout energy for this Penn State-Illinois primetime game that's coming up next here on our Locked On Crossover.
With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rates may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, Zach. You mentioned him in the first segment, and I'll be honest, he's my biggest concern coming into Saturday, and that's Kotelnicki. He's a guy who led the Kansas charge against Illinois last year, where, I mean, it was an embarrassment for Illinois, essentially. I believe the score is 34-10 coming into the fourth quarter. We ultimately made this score a little bit more respectable, but you kind of see what that loss means to Kansas now. I'm curious on your thoughts right now. What has he done to the Penn State offense in the first three games that you've noted?
Sunny, I don't even know where to begin, because Mike Yurcich made this offense operate out of a phone booth, and I get it. Drew Aller is a year ahead, a year better, right? He now has a year of extra experience. Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, a year of extra experience. But they didn't make all of these changes on offense because the offensive playmakers weren't the issue. Penn State made one change, and it was to the offensive coordinator, and they went out, and Oklahoma wanted Andy Kotelnicki, right? They had to go out and outbid other schools to get Andy Kotelnicki to be its offensive coordinator, and you're seeing it pay off immediately. I get it, West Virginia, okay, Bowling Green is proving better to be better than just your average MAC team. But the offense is doing something it didn't do at all a season ago, carrying the defense. Penn State has now put up 30-plus points in the first three games. The competition might be a little questionable here, but it's just so much different. Explosive plays, yards per play. Drew Aller looks more confident. You just have to, and the key is the pre-snap motion, the pre-snap movement, where defenses are constantly moving and they just look silly trying to cover simple plays, and Kotelnicki's able to disguise this just by moving a receiver around, sending a tight end across the line of scrimmage, having a running back start one way and then reverse course and then come in for a fake jet sweep, and it's all at Drew Aller's discretion. Drew is allowed to make adjustments at the line of scrimmage. He's allowed to change the play. He's allowed to make the read. Andy Kotelnicki's not telling Drew, hey, you need to hand this ball off to the running back on the jet sweep. No, we have receivers going out for passes. If you see that the linebackers and the safeties are flowing to the running back, take the pass. If you see that the linebackers and the safeties are staying home, hand it off. Keep the football. Drew Aller looks so much like the complete quarterback. Somebody that you said doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. 3 interceptions between last year and the one this season. Drew doesn't turn the ball over, doesn't put it in harm's way. He can throw it as far as you need him to. He is accurate. The reason he looks inaccurate is to avoid those turnovers that are more costly. An incompletion allows you to play another down, or allows your defense to take over after a punt. A turnover gives the opposing offense an opportunity in plus territory. So I like that we've seen the complete version of Drew Aller that Illinois is going to have to face as well, and Drew Aller can run the football too, if you didn't know that already.
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback battle should be an interesting one because, as you said, you're talking
about... I like Luke Altmaier a lot.
Yeah, you're talking about two quarterbacks who kind of play in a similar style in the sense where, at least now, of course, Penn State fans last year, the last memory they may have of Luke Altmaier is those 4 interceptions in that first half. But he's greatly improved since that game. In his last 6 games of last season, he had 10 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. This year, 4 games in, he's thrown 10 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. He's really grown from what he was last year. The narrative was, he lost his job to John Paddock at the end of the season, when that really wasn't the case. Luke Altmaier had suffered a concussion, and then John Paddock threw for 500 yards, and it's tough to bench a quarterback when he throws for a school record yardage. But Luke Altmaier could have sulked in that position, and he could have complained, but he didn't. He asked John Paddock questions, and he kind of looked at John as a mentor. And all offseason long, the coaching staff hasn't wavered in their enthusiasm for Luke. There was no, maybe we have to search the transfer portal for another guy. Luke was always the guy. And you see it now. He's a guy who can win the game with his arms, and he can win the game with his legs. And so I think it's going to be an interesting matchup on Saturday, because we saw what that Penn State defense did to the Kent State quarterbacks. And so Luke Altmaier, just to give you a couple stats, I was checking out his PFF grades. When he has a clean pocket, he's hitting 89.2% of his adjusted passing percentage. That essentially saying, if he's not being rushed, if he's got a clean pocket, he's going to hit a wide receiver at the target 9 out of 10 times. And so that's just a very poised quarterback, much different than the guy that you faced off with last season.
Yeah, that's true. They put Illinois behind the sticks, and that's why Penn State was able to just, control the game, kind of sneak in and sneak out of Champaign in that case, because I'm not expecting that this time around. We are talking about not only an electric environment, which we'll get to in a moment, Sunny. I want to know your thoughts on this whiteout energy and how Brett Bielema said, I don't know what they're doing. And it's been a little bit of a clickbait segment there from Coach. But Penn State has improved at quarterback. Illinois has improved at quarterback. Penn State has multiple running backs that they can turn to and that they feel confident in. Illinois, similar situation. You told me the last time you have 3 or 4 running backs that Illinois feels confident in to carry the load if they had to individually. Then you say they have a dynamic duo at wide receiver. Penn State's wide receivers are the same, but because of Andy Kotelnicki, they are playing out of their minds through the first 3 games and look so much better than they did a season ago, in addition to who has been described as the most complete tight end in college football, Tyler Warren. So I'm looking at 2 offensive groups that are coming into this game that are playing well above expectations and should continue to, and 2 defenses that still have question marks because of, some injuries and some performances, or at least the expectation in the preseason that they're not going to do as well. So I think that makes for a great primetime matchup. 2 offenses that are continuing to hit their strides respectively. Then there's this whiteout energy. So it sounds like it's going to be the unofficial. I mean, it is. I don't need to say it sounds like. So Illinois is going into a whiteout environment because Penn State wants this game to be at night. They don't want to have a whiteout for big noon kickoff. Are you kidding me? And now that this is a top 20 matchup, it's absolutely justified. This wouldn't be the case if Illinois did lose to Nebraska, did lose to Kansas. This wouldn't have whiteout energy. It would just be a prime time at night type of game. I look at this in another angle too, Sunny. Revenge for the 9 overtime game. Penn State seems to be on this revenge tour where they invite Minnesota in because Minnesota spoiled their 2019 season, and then Iowa spoiled the 2021 season. And then Illinois contributed to that as well with just, I want to forget about it completely. Even if Penn State had won that game, I hate that that's in the history books.
Yeah, memes have been created about that game at this point. Everyone knows when you talk about that Penn State Illinois, like people forget about last year's game just because they always tend to bring up the 9 overtime game. Yeah, I mean, this could be a revenge tour, but that's also, I'm bringing it back to Luke Altmaier. I talked about this in a segment earlier this week on Locked On Illini. This could be Luke Altmaier's revenge season as well, right? Like he got back at Kansas and he outplayed Jalen Daniels. We lost to Nebraska last year. Luke Altmaier outplayed Dylan Raiola, 21 for 27, 215, 4 touchdowns last Friday night. And the biggest, red mark on Luke Altmaier's career is that Penn State game from last year, where a lot of the national media kind of made their decisions on who Luke Altmaier was. Saturday night, when, it basically is going to be a 50-50 audience between ours and the SEC game, Luke has the chance to change a lot of people's mind on Saturday night. So, I agree with you. This could be a revenge game, a revenge season, but on both sides.
I think that's an excellent point. And I don't think Luke Altmaier will be intimidated by the whiteout game. I don't think Brett Bielema will either. So this is an experienced veteran coach with a team that is bought in. They believe in Brett Bielema, so they're not going to be distracted by the atmosphere. So the whiteout is always going to, the whiteout environment, whiteout energy is always going to help Penn State, but it's not like Brett Bielema doesn't understand how opposing college football environments work, because they did just go into Nebraska. And they won that game. And they won that game when they weren't supposed to. And they played Nebraska analytically is a top 10 defense. So I respect Illinois, even though they didn't put up a lot of points against Kansas. It took an overtime, but they did score over 30 against a respectable Nebraska defense. So this is going to be an interesting. That's why I said I think the key for victories for both sides are the offenses, and that's what we'll get into next, Sunny. We'll talk about the keys to victory and our expectations for this game, our predictions. That is coming up next here on our Locked On Crossover.
Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com.
Penn State is a minus 17.5 point favorite. The total set at about 47.5. And this is a game that everybody's expecting for Penn State to win. At least most people are. Like, Illinois will keep it close, but Penn State is going to come out on top, whether that's 3 points, 13 points, or maybe 20 or 30 points. I think most people are anticipating a Penn State victory because of how hefty this spread is. And I was surprised by that too, Sonny. I thought it would be a double-digit spread somewhere in the neighborhood. My gut told me 14 points, but I'm not surprised if it's 10 or 11, kind of similar to the Nebraska game. That's a tough game. Illinois has got to quickly adjust and go on the road again for another consecutive primetime game. Penn State's coming out of Bowling Green and Kent State, so it would make sense. But 17.5, that's pretty daunting. I imagine you think that's a lot of points too.
I mean, that's a lot of points, especially with the way that Brett Bielema's teams, for the most part, now granted, last year's Penn State game notwithstanding, Brett Bielema, compared to his predecessors, we don't get blown out nearly as often as we used to. Talk about Illinois football. 17.5 surprised me as well. I was venturing to guess something very similar to you. I guessed anywhere from 10 to 13 points. I think it released at 18.5, jumped up to 20 at one point, and now it's kind of settling in at 17.5 again. But for me, I'm going to be very interested to see how the line moves. So last week, Nebraska opened at minus 8.5. It jumped up to 10, and then it got as small as 5.5 before finally settling in at minus 9 right before kickoff. So it's not like Illinois isn't used to coming into these games as being underdogs. Now, 17 and a half, that seems a lot to me, but as the reasons you stated, you're talking about back-to-back really, really tough road environments for an Illinois team who, let's be honest, right now seems like they're overperforming. And so it seems like Las Vegas is kind of factoring in a little, coming back to the average for Illinois on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. They're at least anticipating Illinois to regress a little bit. Again, I don't know how much stock I can put into that Kansas game. You can put a good amount of stock into the Nebraska game, even though I think Nebraska should have won. Illinois kept it close. They were 10-point underdogs, and that wasn't a 10-point game. They kept it close, and at the end of the day, probably should have lost by a field goal, but that's still a respectable performance on the road in that environment against a top 10 defense. You put up 30 points. Yes, it was overtime, but you put that up against a top 10 defense. Penn State's defense right now going through some changes because depth is limited. KJ Winston is going to be out again. He is Penn State's best defensive player right now to this point. Now, they still have Abdul Carter. They still have Zane Durant. But the spread I'm a little hesitant on if you're going to have me make a prediction. What I am confident in is the total. I think you can attack this total and go after the over. Luke Altmaier is better. Drew Aller is better. Illinois has really good quality playmakers at wide receiver. Penn State's wide receivers are playing much better with a lot more confidence. And then you have a star tandem in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen going up against an Illinois defensive line that I don't think is as good without Randolph and Newton from a season ago. Yes, the secondary is forcing turnovers and doing very well. But now Andy Kotelnicki comes in, and I saw the report about how basically he's caused Illinois' defensive coordinator some sleepless nights and looking at the film over and over and over again. So maybe that pays off a little bit, but that's what Andy Kotelnicki does is he literally keeps defensive coordinators up at night. Literally. I think the story here is that you could get a shootout type of game in this situation. Penn State's offense, I still think, has more to prove. I don't think everybody's bought in, and I don't think enough people are looking at Illinois' offense as well. Like you said, this is a revenge tour for Luke Altmaier, who has 10 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. That is very impressive to me, given the fact that he has faced some tougher defenses.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I know you brought up this Kansas and, thinking that we're a couple bounces here and there from losing to Nebraska as well. But, I mean, I can also bring up that Bowling Green game, right? 34-27 against a maybe top half MAC team like Bowling Green. We haven't really, the teams, Kansas is clearly better than Bowling Green, at least in my opinion.
Do we know that for sure? On a neutral field, Kansas would be favored against Bowling Green. Okay, they'd be favorited.
Yeah. But again, it's...
I get your point.
About Nebraska, I think Nebraska is clearly, in my opinion, at least top 25 team. Illinois and Nebraska are at very similar levels. And if you're telling me that it was a bounce here and there, but again, it was in Lincoln, Nebraska. It was on a Friday night where they were celebrating their 400th sellout. That wasn't an easy environment to be in. So it wasn't one of those where we were the strong favorite like Penn State was against Bowling Green, and we barely squeaked out with the win. No, we were the underdog there. We're 9 points going into that game. We played with poise. We weren't intimidated by the scene around us. So obviously Penn State is an upgrade from Nebraska. And I'm not saying the same thing's going to happen on Saturday, but the same reason, I know a lot of folks on social media got upset with Brett Bielema's quote about saying this unofficial whiteout saying whatever the heck that means. I think he's just trying to set the tone for his team that, hey, it's business. Brett had one of my favorite quotes of the season during the postgame at Nebraska. And he basically said that we knew it was going to be a sellout, their 400th sellout. We knew the whole college football world would be watching. But I told the players in that locker room that that crowd might be sold out, but you're in charge about how loud they are during that game. And so basically, just setting up that business mindset, I think that's going to be the case on Saturday. For the most part, I agree with you, especially if the offense that played against Nebraska shows up. I think it's going to be a relatively close game. And, what you deem as close is, up to you. I'm thinking within 10 or so. I do think ultimately Penn State is just on a different level than what Illinois is at right now. Even if Illinois continues to play at the level that they're playing, I think Penn State's just one tier above.
And I'm glad that you phrased it that way, because I'm in the same case here. I also think that let's finish with this, Sunny, to wrap it all up. If Illinois is to win this game, I want your biggest key to victory. For Penn State, it's the offense, because I don't think the defense is it's not at its best. It's doing the best with what it has available to it, but it's not at its best. Whereas this offense just continues to trend in the right direction because of what Andy Kotelnicki has done to revitalize this group that was almost identical to a season ago. They just all have a year of more experience. I think Penn State can put up 30 points. I think they can almost push their individual total to 40 points. And I think that's what it's going to take. You're just going to have to keep Illinois playing from behind and challenge them, because Brett Bielema, as he showed when the game was close, he'll flip that switch and go into that ground and pound 7 offensive lineman look that just wore Nebraska out at the end of the game. If it is a 3 or a 7-point game and he flips that switch and goes from the spread to that ground and pound look, Penn State's defense with the 4-2-5, I don't think is ultimately prepared to that. So you have to keep the pedal to the metal, put your foot to the gas, and lay as many points out there as possible. I think there are a lot of points in this game. I don't know that Penn State covers that 17.5-point spread, but the key to victory for Penn State is to push the pace and score as many points as possible, which could see 35, maybe even over 40 points in this game.
Yeah, you kind of took the words out of my mouth of what I was going to say. If the offensive line plays on Saturday like they played last Friday, I think between the 4 running backs that we do tend to cycle through, that the goal is going to be to use them, utilize them, and I referenced the stat earlier, give Luke Altmaier a clean pocket. Let him make plays for you, but the only way that happens, especially against this Penn State defensive line, is if they have to respect the run. If they don't respect the run game, then they're going to be running after Luke Altmaier. He's going to be running for his life again, and then that's just going to make things all that tougher for that Illinois offense. So with Illinois, I always say, if we can get up early, obviously Saturday night, there's going to be a lot of energy in that stadium, unofficial whiteout. If Illinois can maybe score first or, get a turnover early and, be in Penn State scoring position, they can quiet that stadium down a little bit. And at that point, Brett Bielema plays Brett Bielema ball, and maybe we can try to control the game from there. If Penn State goes up early, scores 14, it's 14-3 early Penn State, it's going to be hard to really overcome that crowd noise. That that crowd's going to be super loud. You're talking about 100,000+ people screaming in your ears, and then I think Illinois is going to be in pretty bad shape.
And that'll do it for a Locked On crossover episode. He is Sunny Verma of Locked On Illini. I'm Zach Seiko of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, let us know your thoughts down in the comments section, your expectations, keys to victory, the biggest players that you will think that will step up for Penn State, for Illinois. Let us know your thoughts. Sunny, thanks for the time, and I'm glad we could get together again to preview this Penn State-Illinois primetime top 20 matchup.
Absolutely, Zach. It should be a great game, and I'm just hoping it's as entertaining as the one last week against Nebraska. And that'll wrap it up for this edition of Locked On Illini. Please, on your way out, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're going to have 2 episodes today on Friday. Later on in the afternoon, I'm going to release my official prediction for this Penn State game, as well as an interview with Mike Carpenter of the 200 Level podcast. He's got a new book coming out, and we're going to talk about the roller coaster tumultuous ride that the Illini basketball team has had this offseason. Again, daily content every single day. Some days this week I've thrown out 2 videos. And don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe button, but also that notification bell. I'm going to be going live immediately after the Penn State game. So if you want to join me, let me know what you think of a hopeful Illinois victory. Or in case it's a defeat, we can still have a little therapy session. So either way, make sure you join us, and I will see you next time. I'll love you guys.